The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
I'm your darkest dream. They call me devil. My heart is empty. They call me devil, and you should be afraid.
The end is quickly approaching, and this show shall be changing for the new year. You're listening to Betrayal on ARM Radio with your host, Kasy. We are going to give you mystery, true crime, weird history, and bits and bobs from those times. I know that just didn't make sense. We do interject a little bit of humor with this, but we do not laugh at our victims. We poke fun at myself and stupid criminals. So, with that, let's get on with the disclosure. We are not legal, mental, or medical professionals, and we do not claim to be. We may use audio, written transcripts. We'll talk about the transcripts since you can't see it, and discuss the true graphic nature of true crime and horror. For those who are sensitive to that, this is not your show, and we hope you enjoy tonight's episode. Now, I realize today is December 6th, but tomorrow is going to be a very interesting, solemn day, and that is December 7th, a day that will live in infamy. We're going to be discussing Pearl Harbor and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Now, I thought it'd be quite interesting to actually hear audio as if you were listening to it happening in real time. In the 1940s, not a lot of people had televisions. They had radios. And with those, there was radio programming. And the other way that they got their news is they went to the movies and what were called reels. And they were just interject with information before the movie started. Well, I uncovered reels and actual speeches and actual audio from that time. And this is actually happening in 1941 real time. You will hear bombs exploding. You will hear gunshots. You will hear a person who is recording this in real time. And I think it's quite interesting. You're also going to hear from those who were soldiers and naval personnel who were actually on the ships inside Pearl Harbor that got bombed, or on the shore as they were coming in. Because you have to remember, this was a complete sneak attack by the Japanese, or in that time we called them Japs. At the time that this was occurring in Washington, D.C. Now, okay, Hawaii is on a specific time zone. So you've got East Coast, you've got Central, you've got Mountain, you've got Pacific time. And then you have, Hawaii is 5 hours difference from Central, I believe. They're 5 hours behind us. So in Washington, D.C., Japanese diplomats were talking with the president, who was discussing peace and various, diplomatic things. We were not involved with the war that was going on in Europe at the time. We had no involvement with that. We, as far as anyone was concerned, we were neutral. We were out of this. So, for the Japanese to take it upon themselves to decide before they didn't even declare war on us when they attacked us. We were at peace with Japan whenever they attacked us. They declared war after Pearl Harbor was bombed. They said, we are now at war with the United States. Before then, we did not, we were not at war with them. So, obviously, Pearl Harbor was the catalyst, was the cause of us entering into World War II. Before then, we were out of that. Now, we did provide aid to England during the time because they were being bombed by the Nazis and they had food shortages. So we were giving food to England. But the Japanese, the Russians, I believe the Italians, and also Nazis, they were kind of in cahoots with each other, buddies, working together to, for Hitler's agenda. And Hitler's agenda was to take over the world and have a super race who he feels as though, based on his ideology. And at this time, we did not know about the concentration camps and the atrocities that were going on there. We knew that Hitler was advancing, but we were not a part of the war at all. We were like neutral. We were like Sweden, which Sweden got overtaken by the Nazis. The Nazis at the time that we got involved had taken quite a bit of Europe. They had control over quite a bit of Europe. So it's surprising that we were not involved earlier, that it took Pearl Harbor to get us to be involved, because we were not involved at all. Whenever they took over Germany, Austria, France, Belgium, Holland, and all those places. Those are big geographical places if you look at the European map, those are big geographical places that they had overtaken and they were in control of, and they were killing innocent people. They were not only killing Jewish people, they were killing disabled people. They were killing people who sympathized with those that they were killing. They killed disabled people because they were not a part of the master race. They were not perfect, blonde, blue-eyed, strong people. They were disabled. They also did horrible experiments on people, children, men, women, the elderly, and the disabled. They did experiments on twins. They did experiments on people who had skeletal dysplasia, which, are little people who are short in stature, who have disabilities with that, or a form of dwarfism. And they basically did horrific experiments on those people. And they also did experiments on anybody who sympathized. Schindler, who was basically putting his life on the line to smuggle out Jewish people through his list. Have a remnants of the cold still. If he was caught, he would have been executed. He would have been shot. And how he smuggled those people out. We've heard the stories of how certain Jewish people got snuck out, how certain people got snuck out, how certain people snuck out. We've heard it from The Sound of Music. That's based on a true story. actually climbed over the mountains into another country for asylum because he did not want to be a military person in the Nazi army. It didn't go along with his values. There are people who were executed right on the border. They entered the country that they were free, but a Nazi person shot them whilst they were in the country that they were free because they were there was the border, and they shot them inside the other country. There are people who got shot inside churches. We've heard of the word sanctuary, where you are not supposed to, when a person is in a church, that is sanctuary. You're not allowed to get that person out of that area because it's considered holy ground. There are cases where Nazi soldiers shot people, burned churches down with people inside to dispose of those people who were sympathizing with the ones that they wanted to capture. They were ruthless, they were brutal, and they were without a conscience. They were, when those people drank the Kool-Aid, they drank the Kool-Aid. And I'm not referring, I know that drinking the Kool-Aid is in reference to Jonestown, which is horrific, but is a coined term as you're kind of being hypnotized by this other person. You kind of believe whatever they say. The German people, Hitler could do no wrong. No wrong. He was, in their eyes, they believed he was appointed by God. He was doing God's work. He was God's right-hand person. He was a man who cared about them. He was the man who was going to bring them into the future. And they were going to do whatever he said. It was a great honor to serve him. It was a great honor to be chosen to be one of those women, to be constantly giving birth to these blonde, blue-eyed children. And these children, who were considered to be part of Hitler's perfect children, it was an honor. They were lavished upon. They were spoiled. They were, conditioned and worked out and trained, and women were trained and men were trained. It was all an honor for these people. Now, we can look back in history and go, oh my gosh, how in the world can someone be so blind, so stupid? How can they not see what's going on around them? How can they possibly have been so duped by this person who's clearly a mad person? Well, I would like to offer you that hindsight is 20/20. We live going forward, but we examine going backwards. And a lot of things, if you look in today's world and today's culture, you could see parallels between history of the past and history of today. As they say, history is constantly repeating itself over and over and over again. The people change, the scenery change, but the ideology is the same. It's just reformatted. So, I'd like for you guys to examine what is going on in your world and see if you don't see certain countries that are paralleling what Hitler was doing. But, going back to Pearl Harbor, it was Sunday morning. In this time, people were getting up, going to church, and completely unaware that these aircrafts were coming towards them midway and further on. And if you watch the movie Midway, which is a good movie, they've come out with some really good World War II movies, and it seems like there's an influx of World War II and Jane Austen movies, which I love Jane Austen and everything. So this is like pretty cool. But tons of horror movies because horror sells. And so there is this aircrafts that are coming towards Pearl Harbor, and people are unaware of this. Now, this is a time before Twitter, before social media. The radio station was the way to get your news and information. You take out a radio tower, you lose programming, which means the only other way for someone to get communication is by word of mouth. And that took time because even the newspapers were printing. During that time, you had the morning paper, you had the afternoon paper, and you had the evening paper. And those were the sources of news. If you didn't hear it on the radio, if you didn't read it in the newspaper, you just didn't know. You either heard it by word of mouth. That's how they ingested information in that time. And so things were slow coming. Today, we get everything so quick. If you want to know what's going on, at the blink of an eye, go to Twitter. It's like instantaneous. If you want to know, if you want to send someone a letter, you send them an email. Boom, done. Or you send them a text message. Even email is becoming obsolete because everyone just sends a text message. Boom, boom, done. We still send emails. But before that, we sent letters. And letters took a certain amount of time. When email came into flux and people started using email, letters were not necessary. And in the past, letters were delivered by horse and buggy and carriage and things like that. Nowadays, it's over the internet. So you have to kind of think of the line of where the technology was back then and compare it to now. If Pearl Harbor happened now, I guarantee you there'll be people like doing, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, all those live feeds, Instagram videos, along with tweeting and everything else. You would get the message instantaneously or pretty close to instantaneously. Whereas in the past, it took a while. Unless you were right there, it took a while. Even if you were right there, it did take some time to get that information. So when they saw these airplanes going ahead, you have to remember, Pearl Harbor area was a military station, naval station. So it was not uncommon to hear airplanes going overhead. It was not uncommon for that to occur. But all those massive Zeros, and they're called Japanese Zeros and kamikazes, and the reason why they were called, Japanese Zeros is because the red dot, which was the land of the rising sun, which was Japan. And they were called kamikazes is because those people knew that they were chosen, or they chose to do this mission, that they were not going back home to their families. They were not going back home to Japan. That their plane was going to be used to bomb the mission. Wherever they were supposed to go, they were supposed to use those aircrafts, the bombs and the aircrafts themselves, to destroy as much as they could. Which means it was a suicide mission. So that's what a kamikaze pilot is. It's a suicide mission. These people were not coming back. So, and it was considered also an honor to do those kind of things. And, so those people, they died. And their aircraft is at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Which, if you are allowed to die at Pearl Harbor, imagine the history of all those wreckage that you would be looking at. I don't know how visible Pearl Harbor's ocean is, because it is an ocean. It is part of the ocean, so there's going to be sharks in there. and other critters and everything like that. So I'm not sure how clear it is, how deep it goes down, but I probably, if you were able to go down there and see all that, because it is also a working naval base. It is still a naval institution. There's still ships that are going in and out of Pearl Harbor. And amongst the remnants and the memorials to Pearl Harbor, it is still a working installation. There's half of it that's dedicated to the Pearl Harbor Museum, which is in the middle, well, where it was originally docked. Actually, it hasn't left that spot since 1941. The Arizona, you can go out there. It has the little, I guess, memorial on top of it. You can look down at it. And I have been there. You can see pictures of it. I mean, if you Google it. But it is an actual station. And yeah, it's pretty surreal of what's going on. And I've seen tons of video of actual footage, which would be either most likely black and white silent footage. If you did have one that had color with sound, that was very rare, because that was a really expensive camera. And if you did have black and white with sound, that was also an expensive camera. But most of the time it was a reel-to-reel type footage. So it was kind of had that skips and pops and things like that. But let's listen to the various recordings and the people who lived through Pearl Harbor, the soldiers and naval personnel, as they recount what was happening as they were experiencing it. Okay, let's get a listen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you tonight at a very serious moment in our history. The Cabinet is convening and the leaders in Congress are meeting with the President. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the President all afternoon. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking to the President at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and the Philippines and sinking one of our transports loaded with lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be ready for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action. For months now, the knowledge that something of this kind might happen has been hanging over our heads, and yet it seemed impossible to believe, impossible to drop the everyday things of life and feel that there was only one thing which was important: preparation to meet an enemy no matter where he struck. That is all over now, and there is no more uncertainty. We know what we have to face, and we know that we are ready to face it. I should like to say just a word to the women in the country tonight. I have a boy at sea on a destroyer. For all I know, he may be on his way to the Pacific. 2 of my children are in coast cities on the Pacific. Many of you all over this country have boys in the services who will now be called upon to go into action. You have friends and families in what has suddenly become a danger zone. You cannot escape anxiety. You cannot escape a clutch of fear at your heart. And yet I hope that the certainty of what we have to meet will make you rise above these fears. We must go about our daily business more determined than ever to do the ordinary things as well as we can. And when we find a way to do anything more in our communities, to help others, to build morale, to give a feeling of security, we must do it. Whatever is asked of us, I am sure we can accomplish it. We are the free and unconquerable people of the United States of America. To the young people of the nation, I must speak a word tonight. You are going to have a great opportunity. There will be high moments in which your strength and your ability will be tested. I have faith in you. I feel as though I was standing upon a rock. And that rock is my faith in my fellow citizens. Now we will go back to the program, which we had arranged for tonight.
And now we take you to Honolulu.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, NBC. Hello, NBC. This is KCU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We have witnessed this morning the distant view, the battle off Pearl Harbor, and a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. It is no joke, it is a real war.
What you listened to right there was actual live report to embassy from Pearl Harbor. What you were hearing in the background was airplanes overhead, which were the ones that were not damaged from the United States. We were engaging the Japanese, who had a fleet aircraft still coming towards the Pearl Harbor to bomb the airfield and anything that we could use to attack them, because we are closest to Japan. And so you heard gunfire, you heard airplanes, you heard the bombs going off. And what happened is when there was, I don't know if you guys are too young for this, I'm too young for this, but in the past, in order to place a phone call, there was a giant, almost like a pegboard, and there was like plugs, and you would plug in to different areas to connect calls and to connect to the United States. And so they were telephone operators who did that, and they did that from a set amount of time. So for them to communicate back to New York, to NBC, they had to make a telephone call in which to do that. She could then, what is called a party line, interject and say, you need to get off this line, and because we need to make an emergency phone call. At that point, the line goes dead. They tried to reconnect and they could not. And so that was why that kind of abruptly ended that programming right there, is because either the tower got struck or the woman came in and she made the emergency phone call, which superseded that other, because you have to have, there's something called triage. And triage, if you've ever watched the movie Pearl Harbor, you'll see that in there, where she took a red lipstick and she was writing on different people, terminal, badly injured, and the ones who are going to die, they just try to make them as comfortable as possible without using the medicine that they could help the ones who had a chance of living. All they could do is just hold their hand as they were passing on. And so they had to triage people based on who was terminally ill, who was moderately, and who was most savable. The ones who were most savable got the most attention, and it kind of went down from there. Same thing that happens at a hospital nowadays. They triage people in the emergency room based on who is the immediate need, which would be the person who's the most critical. And it was the reverse for emergency situations. It's always the reverse. It's always whoever's the most critical, who can make it, who's not terminal, is going to receive the care, followed down to the least critical person. In emergency rooms, it is the most critical, despite if they're going to live or not on there. And so that's what you were listening to with that. Now we're going to listen to Roosevelt declare war on Japan.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked, and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
What do I remember most?
Yes, what?
Oh, several things. Unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I was entering the gate, coming into Pearl Harbor from Wheeler Field, and saw 3 Japanese aircraft flying overhead. And I said to my friend, I said, I wonder who those airplanes belong to. You know, we might be at war. Jokingly. Yes, indeed.
Well, it was quite a surprise. We were coming out of the barracks to go to breakfast. We heard some commotion down in Pearl Harbor. I was stationed at Hickenfield, which is just adjacent to the harbor. And then we saw the red ball on the wings of the planes, and we knew we were in desperate trouble.
Well, the most about the attack was how I saw all the big top brass running all over where I worked. They came down there, Admiral Kimball and all of them came down there. We what they call the information center, where we could plot the airplanes with our radar. See, I was in radar.
Actually, you might say it took a little more time than it was just trying to protect myself and find out what I could do to help. And I stood guard for after it was over, I stood guard at the hospital. They were digging a trench, and that's the one that really got my stomach, was the fact that they were cutting this trench to throw the body parts in, and that really got to me, so to speak.
I was chief operator at Hickenfield in the radio control tower when we were told to go to the tower and start taking information messages coming over the airways.
So you had sort of a ringside seat to what was going on up in the tower.
Yes.
I believe you said you saw the Arizona blow up? Or?
Yeah, there's just a fence between the field and the harbor, and we were looking out over the harbor, and we saw the plane come over, and the bomb went down, unfortunately down the smokestack into the arsenal of the battleship, and the whole thing blew up, and it lifted about 1.5 feet off the water.
A couple weeks before, the week before, we were on the alert. We couldn't find the Japanese Navy, and I sort of suspicious about Japan because I know there was a lot of mongering, just like we're doing today about Korea. Similar, same thing.
Too much of a surprise to be terrifying. We just were very startled about the whole thing.
How did the war change your life?
Well, I was just 19, and after the attack, I spent 4 more years down in the South Pacific in different islands. And I think I come home a little more of a man than when I went in.
I ended up in Fiji Islands down under near Australia. And I had given up hope of ever getting to go to flying cadets. As a matter of fact, I took as a fact that I would never see the mainland again. But if it wasn't for that flag, red, white, and blue, I kept me from going nuts, let's put it that way. And but things changed. I managed to end up on a Dutch boat, Boschfontein, on my way back to the States, 20 days to Los Angeles to go to flying cadets. I had to say that.
What do you think the lesson of Pearl Harbor is for people today? I mean, is there something you would like to tell the younger generation?
Well, I think they should keep in mind that it could happen again to us, and be prepared.
I was 19 when it happened, yeah. It hasn't changed my life. I mean, I love my country, and I was doing what I wanted to do for my country.
The first wave split and it went around the right side of Hawaii and attacked from the bottom. Meanwhile, they hit the airfields on the way in.
And then, after knocking out several hundred U.S. aircraft, they then move on the second primary target, which are these U.S. battleships.
Then the second announcement came over the speaker.
He says, fellas, this is air attack, and this is no fellas. And boy, that brought us to our attention. It means I'm not fooling around. And about that time, the torpedoes started hitting us.
And it just felt like the ship was jumping out of the water.
Because we just go bang, 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 you know. Well, first thing I did was go down below decks.
We were in this turret down in the pit when the first torpedo hit. We started to go to general quarters. One of the Japanese planes flew right down the port side of the ship, and I could see the pilot and the radioman laughing like everything.
Mr. Yoshino was an aircraft commander, and as he entered target zone, they dropped to 30 feet off the water. He shouted for his pilot to rudder left, and they went after the Oklahoma. He said he could see the faces of the sailors looking at him, waving and running, and he had his hand on the lever to release the torpedo. As they got closer, he screamed, "Yoy!" and pulled the handle. That dropped the torpedo.
We all ran to our battle stations. Mine was in number 4 turret handling room, which was about 3 decks down.
You're running, you're thinking about getting to your battle station, and you just lose track of the hits.
I had to run at this passageway, then go down this ladder. And another hatch, the ladder went straight down. Probably took me 5 or 6 seconds to get down there. I moved pretty fast in them days.
I went down on a 3rd deck, and that hatch is 13.5 inches thick. And they started closing that hatch. I said to myself, well, I've been trained to be a loader on any aircraft now. In case somebody gets hit or hurt, I could replace him. And I got out of there.
As aerial torpedoes keep slamming into the ship, men are frantically attempting to escape from below deck. At the same time, the ship is being overwhelmed by water rushing in from the damage from the torpedoes. And the first instinct when the ship comes under attack is to establish watertight integrity by closing hatches so that flooding doesn't extend to other parts of the ship.
Every time I went through a hatch, somebody else would dog it down. So I'm trying to undog one, and the other guy on the other side beating it down.
When I got down in the handling room, somebody had spilled some oil on the deck down there. It was a steel deck, all shined up. There were so many people down there, and they're all jabbering. Most of that was panic sounds, especially when they started slipping on that deck and couldn't get up.
When JC got to the radio room, his men were all unconscious. And he revived one man and took him up to safety, and then went down, revived another man and went up, and went down a 3rd time, brought another man up.
Then all of a sudden we got hit by 3 torpedoes. Boom, boom, boom. All heck broke loose. I saw the planes diving everywhere and machine gun bullets flying all over. And everything on the starboard side started breaking loose. Then an armor-piercing shell came right through the top of our turret.
So there was no easy decision on Oklahoma. No one could just make the easy, quick decision that gets them through the day without injury. Everyone had to make some direct confrontation with life and death.
I was a striker, but I was still on the deck force. And the minesweeper, we only had 11 men, enlisted men, and 2 officers. It's the same as any other morning. And we were sleeping on the west side of the channel at 12 to 4 in the morning. And I was on the helm, steering the ship. At 3:45, he was sitting on the port side on the captain's chair, and when he called Mr. McCroy, the officer of the deck, and he said, "Mr. McCroy, we got company." It was a submarine, enemy submarine. And when I went home from the ship that morning, I told my wife not to call me for anything because I was tired. I hadn't slept in all night, and she seemed like I went to bed and slept about 10 minutes, and she come to the bedroom and she said, "Get up, quick! We're being attacked." And I was still sleeping, half asleep, and I told her not to bother me, that I was still sleepy and I wanted to get rest. And she said, no, get up, because this is very important. The Japanese are attacking us. I said, oh no, they can't be doing that. And I finally woke up completely, and I realized what she was telling me, and I went. She said, "Come on outside the apartment." The whole harbor was on fire, all the harbor. I could see the black smoke from one end to the other because the ships were on fire and burning the oil. We left and got underway, and we let out of gear and started to sweep when the destroyer come, what I call flying out the harbor, because I had never seen a ship leave the harbor so fast. And the reason for that was a Japanese fighter after it, and he was shooting at that destroyer with all he had, all the guns he had. And the destroyer, instead of going to straight, he turned to us and ran over our cable and destroyed it completely. The Japanese Zero was firing at it as we passed at our stern, and he almost hit us. It was just a few feet, and because he was trying to get at that destroyer real bad. I started crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it, because the sailors that were trying to save themselves, and all the dead bodies and the oil, and the ships were on fire, and they were jumping off the ships, and just trying to save themselves as much as they could. And there were boats after boat after boat trying to pick the casualties up. I always liked the Navy, always. I admired it, and it made me very proud that I had joined, and I still do. To this day, I told them, I'd do it again if you want me.
What do I remember most?
Most, yes. What?
Oh, several things. Unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I was entering the gate, coming into Pearl Harbor from Wheeler Field, and saw 3 Japanese aircraft flying overhead. And I said to my friend, I said, I wonder who those airplanes belong to. You know, we might be at war, jokingly. Yes, indeed.
Well, it was quite a surprise. We were coming out of the barracks to go to breakfast. We heard some commotion down in Pearl Harbor. I was stationed at Hickam Field, which is just adjacent to the harbor. And then we saw the red ball on the wings of the planes, and we knew we were in desperate trouble.
Well, most of the attack was how I see all the big top brass running all over where I worked. They came down there, Admiral Kimmel and all of them came down there. We what they call the information center, where we could plot the airplanes with our radar. See, I was in radar.
Actually, yeah, you might say it took a little more time than it was just trying to protect myself and find out what I could do to help. And I stood guard for after it was over, I stood guard at the hospital. They were digging a trench, and that's the one that really got my stomach, was the fact that they were cutting this trench to throw the body parts in, and that really got to me, so to speak.
I was chief operator at Hickam Field in the radio control tower when we were told to go to the tower and start taking information messages coming over the airways.
So you had sort of a ringside seat to what was going on up in the tower.
Yes.
I believe you said you saw the Arizona blow up? Or?
Yeah, there's just a fence between the field and the harbor, and we were looking out over the harbor, and we saw the plane come over, and the bomb went unfortunately down the smokestack into the arsenal of the battleship, and the whole thing blew up, and it lifted about 1.5 feet off the water.
A couple of weeks before, the week before, we were on the alert. We couldn't find the Japanese Navy, and I sort of suspicious about Japan because I knew there was a lot of mongering, just like we're doing today about Korea. Similar, same thing.
Too much of a surprise to be terrifying. We just were very startled about the whole thing.
How did the war change your life?
Well, I was just 19, and after the attack, I spent 4 more years down in the South Pacific in different islands. And I think I come home a little more of a man than when I went in.
I ended up in Fiji Islands down under near Australia. And I had given up hope of ever getting to go to flying cadets. As a matter of fact, I took as a fact that I would never see the mainland again. But if it wasn't for that flag, red, white, and blue, I kept me from going nuts, let's put it that way. And but things changed. I managed to end up on a Dutch boat, Boschfontein, on my way back to the States, 20 days to Los Angeles to go to flying cadets. I had to say that.
What do you think the lesson of Pearl Harbor is for people today? I mean, is there something you would like to tell the younger generation?
Well, I think they should keep in mind that it could happen again to us, and be prepared.
I was 19 when it happened, yeah. It hasn't changed my life. I mean, I love my country, and I was doing what I wanted to do for my country.
The battleship Arizona graces the back of Donald Stratton's classic truck. Now at 94, he points out the anti-aircraft gun.
Right there.
where as a 19-year-old he fought the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941.
In less than 2 hours, American naval power in the Pacific has been paralyzed.
Some of the pilots waved at us and smiled.
They were waving at you while they were shooting at you?
And we were firing at them, but we could see our bursts in the sky, and they were way short.
The Arizona was one of 8 battleships under unrelenting Japanese airstrikes.
Just blew a fireball about 600 or 800 feet in the air, and that just engulfed us where we were at. I was like burned over 60% of my body. We were just actually burning alive.
For nearly 75 years, Stratton said little about how he survived, as more than 1,100 others on the Arizona perished. But he has finally written a memoir, All the Gallant Men. It reveals things even Velma, his wife of almost 67 years, had never heard.
When I read the book, I cried.
Of the explosion, Stratton writes, the flames found us, burning off our clothes, our hair, our skin. Men stumbled around on the deck like human torches, each collapsing into a flaming pile of flesh. A makeup artist's recreation of his injuries is hard to look at. How do you go on fighting or trying to survive with that amount of pain?
Well, it's just self-preservation. I just pulled the skin off my arms and threw it down because it was in the way. And then
You pulled the skin off your arms?
Well, I was burned and was just hanging down there.
Recovery meant months of searing pain and surgeries. When doctors wanted to amputate his limbs, Stratton refused. Did you think you're going to make it?
I don't think I ever entered my mind that I wouldn't.
And he wouldn't be kept away. Little more than a year after Pearl Harbor, he re-enlisted and fought in the Pacific. Did you think you had a score to settle?
Thought about a little revenge, but we had a job to do.
Over the years, he has returned again and again to the Arizona Memorial.
It's very sad. That's a very sacred place. I lost so many shipmates that day. It's just like going back and losing them all over again.
Have you managed to forgive Japan?
Let's put it this way. 1,167 men out there on that Arizona. I sure as hell wouldn't shake hands with them, so I'm not going to do it.
You know, in stories like that, I wish my grandfather's story, which they were known as the quiet generation because they didn't talk about it. And my grandfather rarely talked about World War II and what he did. It was a bad, war is hell. And some of the videos and audios that we have, I think, got destroyed somehow. And so it is lost to time. But I wish I could share the stories of my grandfather's experience in World War II. But we have these people's experience. War is not glamorous. War is hell. And let us not ever forget the sacrifices of those who experienced this tragic day in history. That's our show for today. Have a safe and happy week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.